This happened a couple years ago. My girlfriend and I decided to take a little trip one Saturday towards the end of summer. There's this great little beach town about an hour away, and that's where we plan to go. There are beaches much closer to us, but this spot is on the other side of the peninsula, so you can see the sunset over the water. It's further away, but well worth the drive. We took off in the morning, and the only plan we had was to spend the day at the beach. The city we live in is somewhat populated, and it's nice to get out of town once in a while. As you leave the city and head east, there's pretty much nothing but farm fields. The entire drive to the beach is very rural. I guess you could say there's a main route you take, but it's a 2-lane road out in the country, so it's a nice quiet drive with little traffic. It's actually a pretty popular road for motorcycles since it's got a lot of curves and is pretty scenic. Anyways, we made it to the park and stayed at the beach until late afternoon. We went and had dinner at a local restaurant and ended up going back to a different area of the park to enjoy the sunset. It was pretty much a perfect day, and we both didn't really want it to end, so we stayed at the beach until well after dark. It must have been close to midnight when we left to head back home. We were about halfway there when I noticed we were pretty low on gas. Judging by where the gauge was and the distance we had left to travel, it was questionable whether or not we'd have enough to make it back, and I didn't want to push it if we didn't have to. I knew there were a couple gas stations along the way, so we just stopped at the next one. We got a few miles further and I saw the sign for the gas station. I pulled in and realized it was closed. That's when it hit me that, unlike in the city, these gas stations way out of town don't stay open 24 hours. We slowly made our way to turn around when I saw a guy on a bicycle turning into the lot from the side street. He was coming toward us and waved his hand as if he was trying to get our attention. I stopped the car as he approached my window, and he asked if we needed gas. I told him we did, and he seemed to take a quick glance inside the car to check us out or something. He said everything on the main road was going to be closed, but there was one a few miles away right near the marina that was still open. He said to go about 2 miles down the side street and turn left at the stop sign, and it'll be another mile or so down the road. You can't miss it, he said. I thanked him and pulled up to the street. Chelsea asked, "We don't have enough to make it home?" I told her the low fuel light was going to come on any minute, and we better be safe and just grab some now. I turned onto the road in the direction the guy told me to go. We got to the stop sign and I started to turn left. I noticed up ahead there was an old truck stopped in the middle of the road just sitting there. I had my window down, and for a second or two as my car came to a stop, I thought I heard the classic sound of loud, blown out exhaust, but it stopped right away. I slowly approached the truck to go around them when the driver reached out the window to flag us down. I came to a stop next to the truck and Chelsea rolled down her window about halfway. There were 2 guys in the truck, in their mid-20s if I had to guess, and they looked a little gritty. The driver said the truck died on them and he asked if we could give him a jump. Right away I was a little suspicious. I swear I just heard this thing running. I told him I didn't have any jumper cables, and he said, "Oh, no problem, I have some. We just need a car." I didn't want to leave these guys stranded if they really did need help, but I wanted to confirm that they were being sincere. I actually know a lot about cars, so I started to stall a little bit by playing kind of dumb and asking some questions. "So you were just driving down the road and it all of a sudden died on you?" The guy said, "Yeah, it just shut right off." This already sounded a little fishy. This truck was definitely old enough that it didn't have a computer-controlled engine, which actually would shut down if the battery got low enough. But an old carbureted engine will usually stay running, even with a dead battery, as long as you don't shut it down. It's all mechanical. There is no computer. I continued, "Aw, man, that's no good. Well, what happens when you try to start it?" "Oh, it won't start," he said. "That's why we need a jump." I said, "Yeah, you tried to start it though? What happens when you turn the key?" I'm just curious. The passenger chimed in now, and there seemed to be a hint of frustration in his voice. It won't start, man. Can you just give us a jump or what? I really wanted to get the driver to turn the key so I could confirm or deny my suspicion. I said, yeah, I can give you a jump. I'll turn around in a second, but just try to start it one more time before we hook up the cables. It seemed like he didn't want to. It's not going to start on its own, man, he said. Come on, just crank it once and see, then I'll pull up, I replied. I could hear the passenger mumble something, and then the driver sort of leaned forward, almost like he was reaching under the dash with his left hand, and he turned the key with his right. The engine rolled over for a few seconds, and then he stopped and said, See, we need a jump. The passenger mumbled something else, and there was also a distinct clunk at the same time. It was that hollow metallic sound you hear when something hits the bed of a truck. Was there someone back there, I thought. Either way, I knew these guys were scheming. If the battery was actually dead, the engine shouldn't have rolled over like it did. He must have pulled the choke or hit a switch to disable the ignition, which I've seen people do before with cars as like a hidden anti-theft thing. I didn't want these guys to think I was onto them, so I said, yeah, definitely needs a jump. Let me pull up and turn around so we're not blocking the road. Chelsea must have thought something was off too. I felt her tap my hand a few times like she was trying to tell me not to do it without saying anything. I pulled past the truck and it was a narrow road, so I had to do a 3-point turn. When I put the car in reverse, I told her to hold on. I could hear the sound of the truck fire up as I put my car into drive and floored it. I managed to squeeze past the old truck as it started to move in reverse across the road. Chelsea was freaking out as we raced down the road, and I wasn't exactly calm either. I turned the corner heading back to the main road. The truck was behind us all the way down the side street. Once we reached the main road and turned onto it, there was luckily a couple other cars on the road. It was hard to tell, but it looked like the truck followed us down the main road for a mile or two, and then they turned off. We sped back towards town and the low fuel light came on just as I expected. Luckily, we were able to make it to the gas station right at the edge of the city. Looking back, I bet the guy on the bike was with the guys in the truck and the whole thing was some kind of setup. Neither of us thought of it at the time, but later I looked up the area on maps. There actually is a marina with a gas station nearby, but the bike guy told us to go the wrong way. You'd have to turn right at the stop sign, not left. Actually, if you go left, it eventually dead ends a few miles down. I think those guys were trying to block the road to force us down that way. But to do what? I don't know. I'm a woman, and this happened a long time ago. I'm from a pretty small town, but at the same time, it's big enough to have multiple school districts. Once I was in my later high school years and could drive, I had friends from each of the 4 other schools in the area. On weekends, it was pretty common to have multiple parties to go to. When I say parties, this doesn't always mean huge gatherings. It was actually more common that people would hang out in small groups of around 4 to 8 people. I think it was the summer between my junior and senior year, and my friend Jeremy always had people at his house. He was from a different school across town, and I think his parents had a cottage that they pretty much lived at during the summer. They were gone all the time, so his house was a frequent hotspot. My friends and I would go over there quite a bit, since we were all good friends with Jeremy and his friends. Over the course of the summer, we ended up over there probably 3 or 4 times a week. It was always a fun place to hang out. The only thing was that every once in a while, you would encounter the next door neighbor, Carl. He was a couple years older and already graduated. He would wander over sometimes and hang out for a while. He mostly seemed alright, but I always thought there was something, well, off about him. I don't know how to put it, he just seemed a little creepy. I can't even think of examples of things he would do, It was just more of a feeling I had about him. I definitely made a point to not get stuck alone with him. One night during that summer, I drove my friend Kristen and I over to Jeremy's. I ended up driving a lot for whatever reason. I had this Buick station wagon at the time that was my dad's old car. I remember it was a Friday or Saturday night because there were more people at Jeremy's than there would be during the week. People were a little spread out between inside the house and outside on the porch. We had another party to go to later in the night, so we went over to Jeremy's earlier. I remember seeing Carl, but there were enough people there that I was able to avoid him easily. We stayed there for probably about 2 hours and decided to leave once things started to pick up more, and we wanted to go to the other party anyways. We said our goodbyes, then we got in my car and started driving to the other side of town. Kristen and I decided we would go through Taco Bell on the way to grab a quick snack before the next stop. It was around 11 p.m. and completely dark out by this point. We were having a good time on the way, listening to the radio and talking, but periodically I kept thinking I was hearing something. It was hard to explain, but it was like a rustling sound. I don't know anything about cars, and everything seemed to be working fine, but I kept hearing the noise, or so I thought. I guess it would have been hard to tell with the music and the conversation. Maybe halfway there I turned down the music and asked Kristen if she heard anything. She asked what I was talking about. I told her to just listen and see if we hear anything. For a couple minutes we stayed quiet and tried to listen for any unusual sounds, but there was nothing. I assumed it must be nothing, so I turned the radio back up and we continued the conversation. We pulled into Taco Bell a few minutes later and got in line. It was pretty busy, so there were several cars in front of us. As we sat there waiting to order, I thought I heard the sound again. Kristen heard it too because she asked, "Wait, was that it?" I told her yes, and we tried to listen closer again. We pulled up to the speaker and placed our order, and honestly that was enough to make us completely forget about the sound. We waited in line for a few minutes and then got up to the window. The worker gave me the total and I handed him my card. He ran it and handed it back to me with my receipt. During the transaction he was making small talk with us. "Hey, how's your night going?" and things like that. He remained in the window talking while we waited for our food. As he reached out to hand me the bag, something caught his attention behind us and he stopped mid-sentence for a moment. As I grabbed the bag he said, "Hey, there's something moving in the back of your car. What do you got back there?" I didn't know what he was talking about and said, "What? Nothing. What do you mean?" He replied, "I swear I just saw something move, but maybe not. Have a good night." I said, "Thanks, you too," and pulled away from the window. Kristen spun around in her seat to look in the back as I pulled around the building. We were both confused and wondering what he was talking about. It's hard to see all the way in the back of the station wagon from the front seat, so I pulled into the nearest spot and put the car in park. We both stepped out and walked toward the back of the car. Kristen screamed before I did. As we approached the back, the rear door flung open and a person rolled onto the ground and took off running. He had his back to me and I didn't get a good look at his face. I almost puked when I heard Kristen scream that it was Carl. We both sort of stood there freaking out. A car pulled up and asked if we were alright and said they saw someone running away. They thought we got mugged or something. We told them what happened and they offered to call the police. They showed up and took our statements shortly after. I still feel sick when I think about the situation. How long was he waiting in the car for us to leave Jeremy's? I assume he heard the Taco Bell guy ask what was in the back of the car and he knew he'd be caught. But the thing that really haunts me is wondering what he was planning to do. A few months ago, I was up at my cousin's cabin, which was about 2 hours away from where I live. A couple times a year, his family goes there for a couple weeks at a time. During the first week, there's usually an open invitation for some friends and relatives to stay at the cabin. I'd been up there for a few days and was planning to leave the following evening so I could get back home for work. It was early in the day and there was some talk that there was supposed to be a big thunderstorm rolling through the area. It wasn't an immediate concern since storms were pretty common this time of year. We continued to enjoy the day on the lake when one of the women started talking about how the storm was supposed to be pretty wicked, with the potential for tornadoes, heavy winds, and large-sized hail. I'd gotten a new truck not too long before this, and the thought of incurring serious damage during the storm didn't sound too good. Not to mention the potential of power outages and other possible scenarios. The weather in this part of the state is always a lot more severe compared to where I lived, just 150 miles south. I thought about it a little more, and I decided I was going to leave tonight and try to beat the storm. I'd checked the weather report a couple times, and it sounded like the storm wasn't going to hit until after midnight. We had dinner, and I ended up staying probably a little longer than I should have. It was about 11 p.m. when I finally left. Everything was fine for the first 30 minutes or so as I drove through the dark wooded area, and this was when the rain started. It was pretty light at first, but then quickly got really heavy, and the thunder and lightning started as well. I guess the storm showed up sooner than expected. Pretty soon it was really hard to see, even driving really slow with the wipers at full speed. Strong gusts of wind kept pushing me all over the road, and I considered pulling over to wait it out, but it looked like a huge system on the radar, and I thought if I just kept pushing south, I would get out a lot quicker than waiting. I pushed through for another half hour, I'd say, and I was still in the middle of nowhere, but it seemed like the rain was starting to let up a bit. I was only about halfway home now, and it was still raining hard, but I could now drive faster than I had been. I was still on the back roads, and the interstate was probably another 20 minutes away yet. I was coming down a hill, and the road curved at the bottom. As I came around the curve, I slammed on the brakes at the last second when I just barely saw a huge tree limb laying across the road. It was unavoidable, and I came to a stop just as I slid into it. It was a surprise, and it actually scared the heck out of me, so I sat there for a minute while I calmed down. The storm must have knocked down the tree, and it looked to be about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, maybe even a little larger at the base. It was obviously pretty large, but it looked like I could probably move it on my own, at least enough to get my truck around it. I backed up a little so I could use the headlights to see, and I got out. I first tried to move the smaller end, thinking it would be lighter, but there were more branches on this end, and they were all tangled up in the brush on the side of the road. The other end appeared to be free, and I thought I should be able to move it enough to angle it out of the way. Over the sound of the steady drizzle, I thought I heard a branch snap in the woods behind my truck. I reached down to grab the end of the tree limb when I noticed it had been cut with a saw, not broken. I stood up and looked around as it set in that it must have been dropped intentionally. I could only see in front of the truck where the headlights shined. It was pitch black behind it, and I heard another branch snap, this time closer. I felt chills as I realized I was not alone. I could now hear what sounded like multiple sets of footsteps in the woods getting closer and closer. I completely panicked. I didn't think I had time to move the tree, so I ran to my truck and jumped inside. I could hear the footsteps on the road when I slammed the door shut. I put the truck in drive just as someone hit the window and tried to open the door, but luckily they lock automatically when you put it in gear. I hit the gas and aimed for the smaller end of the tree. Hearing the sound of the branches scraping against the front end and the undercarriage was a small price to pay to get out of there. The truck bounced over the tree and I flew down the road like no other. I kept looking back behind me, making sure I wasn't being followed, and I thank God I wasn't. I made it to the highway and safely home after that. I was disappointed to see a bunch of scratches on the front of my truck, but ultimately I was so glad that I had it. I was able to drive over that tree, but I don't think that would have been possible with a car. They sit too low and you'd get stuck, I think. I didn't even get a look at how many people were there or what they look like, but I'm so happy I didn't find out.